In my Rest Your Knee video, I said that the movie was most likely very cliche and not necessarily that original either.
It's a cliche friendship movie. There are some things that make me just think it's like an average, unlikely friendship movie.
I knew that this was definitely not the first time the idea of opposite sides interacting was really implemented into a story. I mean, that's the entire basis of Romeo and Juliet. Nor was this the first time it was specifically opposing animals that were fraternizing. Regardless, I still wanted to believe that this movie in particular was better than all the rest.
I thought it was original at the time, and it definitely is an original movie. That it is actually a very clever movie, even if it doesn't seem like it at first glance.
I mean, it is really good, but I thought that I might have been biased because I had never seen any of these other animal unlikely friendship movies. As a result, I decided to watch a movie that had been silently on my radar for a while, The Fox and the Hound. And let me just say, I will never doubt Arashino Yoroni's quality ever again. The Fox and the Hound is a Disney movie from 1981, meaning it was released during the proverbial Disney Dark Age, a period of time in Walt Disney Animation history where the movies did not necessarily have the same feel to them as they did before, and are, for the most part, unpopular or at least unknown by most fans. The reason this period was so different is likely because it followed the death of the man himself, Walt Disney, and the company was forced to start making productions without him, which proved to be a difficult task. Case in point, The Fox and the Hound, where during production several animators left the studio, new people were being brought in while the old workers were desperately trying to keep their jobs, and no one could decide how exactly the original story should be adapted into film. Yeah, this movie was a mess during production, but hey, maybe Disney was still able to create a great film regardless. I mean, at face value, the idea of two enemies, a fox and a hound, becoming friends is at the very least clever, right? No, it's not. First of all, the antagonistic relationship between the two animals is imposed by humans, and is not a natural instinct. It's not very impressive that two sides managed to become friends despite all adversity if there were no internal struggles as well. As for the first complications to Todd and Copper's friendship, although this should have been treated a little more seriously to fit with the overall darker tone of the movie, and to actually make the conflict suspenseful, instead, this scene kind of plays out like a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Just like a silly chase sequence through the barn. I mean, it's not that bad. Both Todd and Copper are genuinely scared, unlike in Tom and Jerry, where Jerry usually has the upper hand in every situation, and therefore Tom is not really a viable threat. Still, this scene does strike me as a little childish. I know this is a movie made for kids, but it was also supposed to have more mature themes, so at the very least make the conflict feel serious. Additionally, why did they become friends when they were kids? Some say it is to reflect the way kids are innocent and blind to any socially imposed barriers, making them more acceptable and willing to socialize with others. Okay, sure, I agree that this definitely has something going for it. Kind of sad story about two friends that gradually drift apart the older they get, and the more they learn about the cruel reality of society. There's just one problem. That doesn't even happen. They do not gradually grow older. The movie just skips forward in time to when they're fully grown adults. I mean, at least there is this montage of Copper, the hound, hunting in the forest. I mean, that's some sort of character arc, right? I think you know by now that the answer is no. This could have been a good way to show how Copper is becoming a more brutal, unforgiving hunter. Except not only is this scene too short to properly convey this, Copper himself looks happy in this scene. Makes the audience believe that he has not really even changed that much since he was a young and innocent child. Honestly, one of the worst parts about this movie is when Todd, the fox, comes up to Copper after they've both grown and asks him if they are still friends. Copper, without even trying to maintain their friendship, is all like,
Todd, those days are over. I'm a hunting dog now.
And Todd's reaction to this is priceless. His ears just fall down very slowly. It's like a little too obvious that he's disappointed. Anyways, Copper showed no signs of being a serious, realistic hunter in that brief montage, yet he shuts down Todd as if he is one. Clearly he still cares about Todd.
Todd, I don't want to see you get killed.
But why? You've firmly established that you do not consider Todd a friend anymore, so the only reason that you would want to protect him is because you respect him as a person. But nothing in those very brief and not really that deep interactions between the two of you seemed to indicate a strong enough connection that would make Copper still want to protect Todd even after they are no longer friends. See, that's the problem with this movie. I can't really be that engrossed in the scenes which are supposed to be very emotionally intense if the entire foundation of their friendship was lacking. The protagonists only have one non-intimate interaction before becoming best friends.
I'm a fox. My name's Todd. What's your name, kid? Mine's Copper. I'm Hound Dog.
When you're the best of friends.
Copper, you're my very best friend. And you're mine too, Todd.
This could be explained away by them being children, not needing a deep connection to form a bond due to their innocence, but a short introduction to their friendship with no gradual evolution makes me as the viewer not care if this succeeds or not. I need multiple, elongated, intimate interactions full of deep connection and effort in order to be connected to and concerned for the characters. Because that way I feel as if there is more at stake if the friendship fails, and the movie would ultimately be more suspenseful. But as it is, I am not able to empathize with Todd's world-shattering realization that he is no longer friends with Copper if their connection was pretty basic to begin with. But at the same time, I don't understand why Copper cares more about being a hunting dog than his friendship with Todd. Part of the reason I don't really understand Copper's motivation to reject Todd's friendship is probably because the audience only sees like 2 minutes of Copper and Todd apart, when it was actually more like a few months. Maybe if the movie devoted more time to showing Copper's growth while on this hunting trip, and actually how he grew to like his role as a hunting dog and accustomed himself to a life without Todd's friendship, then I would understand his motivation a little better. I mean, if the audience can intimately experience the evolution alongside the character, they are able to more deeply understand the reason behind a character's change. Because a quick montage is not as effective as an entire movie's worth of gradual evolution. A short montage that shows Copper's character development seems rushed and unvalidated. The audience cannot comprehend Copper's new character because there was simply not enough time to digest everything, to become accustomed to the new Copper. Good character development is all about gradualism, easing the audience into a character's evolution by slowly showing minor changes over time that eventually lead to the final result. I mean, that's the entire definition of evolution. Drastic changes which take a very long time to fully occur due to the slow accumulation of much smaller changes. It's like, I can't sympathize with Todd's misfortune because their childhood interactions were pretty basic and not that intimate to begin with, yet I simultaneously do sympathize with Todd's misfortune just because I feel as if Copper is acting like an unprecedented jerk to Todd for no reason whatsoever. That seems contradictory, right? Yet it's not just me being a hypocrite. This movie is just terrible at conveying both the growth of their relationship and Copper's character development. It is almost impressive how this movie was able to fail at two completely different aspects in the exact same scene. All of that to say this. This scene pretty much only happens to advance the plot. And no, the scene is not even that sad either, like it should be. It's just kind of there, for the sake of creating conflict. Anyways, the end. No, really, that was the entire movie. Literally everything else did not need to be there. If the main conflict was truly the struggle between maintaining the friendship between two opposing sides, like all the descriptions of this movie claim it is, this scene should have been the climax, and the movie should pretty much be over.
We're still friends, aren't we? Todd, those days are over. I'm a hunting dog now.
It would be an extremely short movie, but at least it would have accomplished its goal of portraying the cruel realism of societal convention. As I already stated, the climax would have been very weak, but still, the movie should have ended here. But it doesn't. We're only halfway through. That must mean that the two of them are going to rebuild their friendship by the end, right? No, they do not. So the entire second half of the movie is virtually pointless. Great. Okay, fine. I'll review the rest of the movie. So the main plot point that occurs in the second half, which drives the rest of the story, is this chase scene. Copper lets Todd off free, but Chief is still hunting him. So the chase continues until Todd runs onto some train tracks. He manages to evade the incoming train, but Chief does not. Why he couldn't just do the exact same evasive maneuver that Todd did, I don't know.
Did he say anything before he died?
He was hit by a train. He probably said train.
So Chief gets hit and is thrown off the tracks. Obviously he should be dead, right? Okay, so he's still alive, but he is dying, right? There's no way he managed to survive that. I guess not. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too long on this because many others have already discussed this scene, as if this is the only bad part about this movie. So basically, Copper now hates Todd and wants to kill him for what he did to Chief.
Todd, if it's the last thing I do, I'll get you for this.
Well, I do agree that Copper's motivation to seek revenge after Todd doesn't really make any sense because Chief didn't even die. There are certainly other problems with his motivation as well. First of all, it was a complete accident that was barely even Todd's fault. And second of all, there didn't really even seem to be that much of an emotional connection between Copper and Chief. Well, okay, there was that first scene when Copper is first introduced. The scene is very short, meaning there can't really be any long-term connections firmly established, but for what it is, I think it accomplishes the gradual growth of Chief's fondness towards Copper decently enough, more so than Copper and Todd's relationship. But that's most likely because Copper and Todd were both very innocent children when they first met, meaning it was much easier for them to create a friendship, whereas Chief is much older and stubborn, so it takes a little longer for him to be accustomed to Copper, but once he does, the impact of their bond is much stronger. But I mean, we never really see Copper and Chief's relationship as adults, so I'm a little unsure whether or not Copper's reaction checks out. I might have been okay with this one scene of Copper and Chief getting along as explanation for Copper's motivation if Todd had actually been responsible and if Chief had actually died. Chief's death is really only a plot device to make Copper hate Todd and genuinely want to kill him, which would have been much more significant if it weren't for the fact that they already were not friends anymore. Seriously, Disney, missed opportunity here. You could have made Copper and Todd still want to be friends up until this train scene, and then make Copper reject Todd's friendship, now that he has at least some sort of motivation to do so. Not just, I'm a hunting dog now. This is really the only other important scene in regards to the main conflict of this movie. The rest of the film is devoted to Todd's subplot, which I barely care about. So the hunter is still bent on killing Todd, even though he is no longer a threat to him. I mean, the woman that was caring for Todd released him into the wild. What, does he blame the fox for Chief's death too? Seriously? You're giving two characters that unrealistic motivation? Anyways, he sets up multiple traps, which really shouldn't have failed, but had to, otherwise this movie would have had an extremely morbid ending. Todd confronts Copper because I guess they just both hate each other now, even though Todd really has no reason to hate Copper. Suddenly Bear. He attacks the hunter and Copper. Todd goes to help, which is probably like the only actual instance of good character in this entire movie. I don't really get his sudden desire to help Copper when they were literally just hacking each other, but I guess Todd's character throughout the film is shown to be considerate enough to make this sudden heroic act kind of make sense. He single-handedly defeats the bear but almost drowns in the process. Copper finds Todd adrift in the river and is now probably realizing how much of a jerk he's been throughout the entire movie for his mistreatment of Todd. You know, rejecting his friendship and then declaring vengeance on him for no good reason. Well, I'm sure he's very thankful now for having Todd in his life, so I guess all is well that ends well. You know, until Todd gets shot. Okay, that didn't happen. Copper steps in before he manages to finish the job. But I mean, like, the hunter literally has his gun right up to Todd, and we know for a fact that he really wants to kill him.
No hunting. Well, now, we ain't gonna do none of that, are we, Copper? We're just gonna get us a no-good fox.
So, like, why didn't he immediately pull the trigger? Anyways, this is like the final confrontation where the hunter, whose name is Amos Slade, by the way, why do I always forget to say their names, has to finally let go of his quick-tempered, grudge-holding ways and instead be respectful enough to spare the life of the fox who saved him and his dog. Although I feel like the lack of suspenseful music, or like any sound at all in this scene, does make it a little anticlimactic. In fact, for the first time I watched this movie, I didn't even know this was supposed to be the climax. I do actually like this scene. Amos's visual change of heart as he decides to honor Copper's wish to spare Todd, as well as this final smile exchange between the two main characters, symbolizing the restoration of peace and mutual respect for each other, both executed very well. Despite not particularly finding this scene significant when I first watched this movie, out of everything else I've watched in this film, I think this scene does the best at deeply impacting the viewer. It really pulls off the positive yet not too energetic ending. It seems well-deserved, as I feel as if each character's actions actually make sense for once, with Todd deciding that it's still the right thing to do to save Copper despite their previous brawl, Copper in turn deciding it's the right thing to do to return the favor and save Todd's life, and Amos deciding that it's best if he stops being so stubborn about killing this one fox and just finally decides to let go of this pointless grudge. And that's the end of the movie. For real this time. In all seriousness, I didn't actually hate the movie while I was watching it. I didn't formulate my opinion of it until it was actually over, as I didn't want to prematurely judge it. There may have been story beats and other aspects that I felt strange, not what I expected. Just because a story doesn't go the way an audience thinks it should, that doesn't mean it can't still be a great movie either. I had been genuinely optimistic for what was to come throughout the entire movie while I was watching. Each scene had the potential to create something interesting and entertaining. But it seemed like every time I thought I was getting good, I was met with disappointment. The movie scarcely seemed to be getting any better. Instead, I felt as if it was losing its focus, and at a certain point, I didn't even know what I was watching anymore. I didn't even realize the movie was over until it literally told me that I had reached the end. That's because, to me, this movie feels incredibly unfinished. I mean, part of the reason could be the runtime is only an hour and a half, but I still even haven't talked about all the side characters and unnecessary subplots that only serve as filler to extend this already pretty short movie. It's a shame, too, because all these unnecessary elements not only bog down the movie, increasing my enjoyment of the main story because I could never be invested in one plot at a time, but also these aspects limited the amount of time available for the main story. Okay, I'll really quickly summarize everything I left out. A woman named Widow Tweed cared for Todd after his mother was shot. She eventually must let him go into the wild due to troubles with Amos and because he is a wild animal after all. But I did not find the scene very emotional because I kind of expected it to happen all along and the entire ride was a little too plain, especially with the obligatory sad music. So now I'll name Big Mom, who some might say is a mother figure for Todd, but I actually say she's just repeatedly intruding on Todd's life, revealing the circumstance to steer Todd in the direction she wants. At one point she forces him to mate with a female fox. I mean, he is attracted to her at least, but that doesn't even make any sense because they look exactly the same. Big Mama herself can't even tell them apart.
Todd!
Oh, hi, Big Mama.
Oh, it's you, Vixie.
'Cause if you like the way you look that much, oh baby, you should go and love yourself.
Lastly, two birds named, I kid you not, Dinky and Boomer repeatedly try to eat a caterpillar with no success. Although these two characters have no legitimate role in the actual story, so much of the runtime is devoted to their shenanigans. I just can't take this movie sometimes. Literally, it seemed like 5 different movies were jammed into this one 90-minute feature. Each subplot fighting for the spotlight. But the one plot that was the most important, the friendship between the fox and the hound, the real main story in which the movie is named after, is wrapped up in the first half. And for the rest of the film, we just get this poorly stitched together mess. The entire thing just left me feeling like it was unfinished, bare-boned, weak, not very impactful, or worthwhile. I've heard many claims that the reason this movie is good is because of just how different of a Disney movie it is. I will admit it is a little on the darker side, but that's not even saying much. No one even dies, except for the mom, I guess. But knowing Disney, that's not much of a surprise. Jeep doesn't even die when he really should have in order to justify Copper's motivation. I've also seen claims that this movie is about the bittersweet end of a childhood friendship. Both people have to eventually go their own ways, but can still respect each other as people. I can kind of see what they're getting at, but regardless, a good theme or a relatable message doesn't mean the movie is automatically good. In fact, if the movie isn't enjoyable, then it should make the audience less likely to agree with what the film is trying to convey, as they associate the quality of the movie with the quality of the message. Also, the movie is not even that good at conveying its bittersweet message. The fact that they stopped being friends in the middle of the movie kind of decreases the emotional weight of the eventual ending where they both go their separate ways, because they were already separated. Plus, I don't really even understand what makes this ending bitter. For an ending that's supposed to be bittersweet, the ending is mostly positive. I mean, everyone seems to be happy, or at the very least, fine. And regardless of how it ended, the movie was still a mess during the majority of the runtime.
You're my very best friend. And you're mine too, Todd. We will always be friends forever, won't we? Yeah, forever.
When I first heard this line, I surely thought it was meant to show that Copper was starting to respect Todd more and be more open to still being his friend, and as a result, the story would continue and they would ultimately restore the bond between them. But nope, the movie ends here. What was the point of even having that line then? If literally nothing else interesting or important was going to happen, you could have just ended the movie after they went their separate ways. But, I didn't actually hate everything about this movie, despite the way it might seem from everything I've said. I don't want people to think that this movie was never emotional or cute at times, because it certainly was. Some of the scenes did actually convey the mood that they were trying to accomplish. The only reason I have a problem with these scenes, however, is because they were just ultimately less impactful, because I didn't really care about the characters at any given point, due to the lack of character development and weak character dynamics. There's a difference between something that's just sad for the sake of being sad and something that actually resonates with you, creating a deeper understanding and greater emotional investment within the viewer. I liked Todd's childhood character and how he was an innocent, yet troublesome individual who was a little too confident in himself.
What did you plan to do if you ran to old Chief?
Chief, I can outfox that dumb old dog anytime.
And I do think the idea of the world repeatedly bashing him on the head with the unfortunate reality that he cannot be domestic forever and has to learn to live like a real fox was interesting in theory, but the one part that ruins this idea is the fact that he so easily becomes fond of Vixie without any persuasion. Every other time previously in the movie, Todd has had other desires, and it was the intrusive Big Mama who has to redirect Todd. But this scene seems to go against all that. Todd, who never seemed to be interested in having a romantic relationship previously in the movie, in fact, how does he even know what a romantic relationship is?
Copper, you're my very best friend. And you're mine too, Todd.
Falls for Vixie very easily on his own. Not only does it seem contrary to his character, but it also shows a lack of character depth. But then again, when he ended up not being good at fishing by himself, Vixie laughed at him, causing him to lash out and leave her as a result.
You're a silly, empty-headed female.
There we go, that's the character that we know and love. Good old stubborn Todd. And his swiftness to anger makes sense due to all the emotional suffering he's been through. I would have loved to see how Todd gradually had to learn to suppress his own arrogance and irritation, admit his faults, and allow Vixie to teach him how to be a real fox. But of course, Big Mama, like always, barging in on his life, forcing him to immediately mate with Vixie with another obligatory song.
When you have a natural attraction, you deserve a mutual reaction.
Big Mama, just chill. Let the relationship slowly evolve. You don't always have to rush everything. Anyways, the fact that mating is definitely a more wild-like instinct, which Todd eagerly submits to, shows that it really wasn't too difficult for Todd to accept his role as a wild animal, neutralizing any conflict or suspense. This really undermines a story which had the potential to be a great narrative about Todd's emotionally taxing journey to having to accept the cruel reality that he is a fox and can't change what the role entails for him. I really want to feel bad for Todd. I mean, he never gets to do what he wants because of Big Mama. Everyone keeps telling him that his friendship with Copper will never work. His friend abandoned him and threatened to kill him on the same day, and the only person who genuinely cared for him in his entire life had just left him. That is a lot of emotional trauma that Todd has to endure throughout this entire movie. Yet Todd seems completely fine by the time he meets Vixie.
Last night was pretty miserable for you, wasn't it, honey?
Just terrible.
You know, I've never been happier.
I feel like he's just not acting the way a person would normally in his situation. He's making it less of a big deal than it should be. That's why I ultimately don't care about any of his misfortunes. That's why this movie is not emotionally investing. It's Todd, who is unaffected by the otherwise traumatic events prior, who is making this movie feel weak. This should be a story of a fox's journey into the submission of his unfortunate reality, but what the movie is telling me is that, hey, all those horrible events that just occurred, they're not that big of a deal, and as a result, my emotional investment is lost. A movie should never make its audience no longer care for its characters. Sure, Todd's ability to cope with the loss of his friends and family may just be the result of Todd's resilience, except no, he is not shown to be able to handle any of the misfortune that comes his way up until this point. He appears genuinely upset and heartbroken each time he is abandoned. Literally the only thing that changed from when he was completely in despair to being totally fine was Vixie. But I really cannot reasonably believe that a romantic attraction to someone that he just met would be able to make Todd happy enough to alleviate the painful effects of every terrible thing that just happened to him. It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, I obviously did not really like The Fox and the Hound. I'm sorry to all those out there who consider it a nostalgic classic, but I believe it just simply does not deserve that praise. I kind of feel guilty saying that though. Since technology has developed to allow movies to become so much longer with better animation, I just feel as if my generation will never be able to appreciate the shorter stories. Always feeling as if more could be done, but neglecting the fact that there was a time where there were limitations, and people were just happy to see a cute and simple film about a fox and a hound. So yeah, it may not be perfect, but it's still great in its own special way.
We'll always be friends forever, won't we? Yeah, forever.
Just kidding. This movie's overrated.